Hi, we're looking at this time at growing tomatoes and why it's so much fun growing them. It's an obsession of mine. Hobby is a nice word. Why grow tomatoes? The basic simple reasons for taste. They are so much better than what you could get in supermarkets. They taste like they used to when you were young. What to grow? Something interesting, something different from the ones you get in the supermarket. Most of the supermarket ones are so commercial they will virtually bounce if you drop them. What types? Heirloom types, in other words, the ones that are grown naturally but not so badly crossbred and certainly never genetic. You can buy plenty of types at any nursery, but look for something different. Tomatoes are actually fruit, which is unusual. We've got a few there from our 2019-2020 crop. We have plenty of tomatoes. We have no problem getting rid of them. Where to grow? Depends on how much space you've got at home, but find somewhere that gets most of the sunlight during the day. 5 hours minimum would be good. Well-drained soil. They don't want to be too wet. You can't use, or you shouldn't use the soil site for 2 years in a row because there's a wilstrum wilt which makes the plants basically die. You should rotate all your crops anyway. It's a good idea to add manure before you start using the plot. A couple of weeks before, put some manure in, dig it in, add some lime if you need to, about a handful per metre squared. The other video on soil types has got some information about how to determine that. You can get specific tomato fertilisers. Read the instructions, as too much will burn the plants, particularly if they're young. I found that out. When to plant? Basically, you're meant to plant in Melbourne on Cup Day, but who knows when Cup Day is going to be this year, so around that time. I tend to plant a bit earlier and never seem to have any problem. Basically, you plant once it's warmed up a bit and there's no more frost coming. If you're growing from seeds, start the seeds 4 to 6 weeks earlier so they will have time to get going. There's plenty of these small greenhouses, all the major nurseries and suppliers. The seed needs to be 20 degrees for it to grow or for it to germinate. Planting out tomatoes, when they're going, if you're growing them from seed, wait till they're 5 or 6 inches tall first. Plant them deep. The stem will actually produce more roots and those will encourage more growth later on. Water them when you plant them. If you need a stake, put that in now because otherwise it will disturb the root structure later on. They need consistent, regular watering, but not too much water. If you don't water them regularly, they'll get a thing called blossom rot, which means the bottom of the tomatoes sort of rot. We found out, pick the tomatoes once they start to show any change of colour and put them on a windowsill where they'll still ripen, because otherwise the possums and the rats get them. Mulch. Yes, use mulch once they're established. Basically, tomatoes are one of the few vegetable or plants that will actually be happy enough with mulch right up to the stem, and all the major ones sell the standard sugarcane mulch. Put it on generously, put some more on later as the season goes on because it will break down a bit. Feeding. They like regular watering, as mentioned before, and some fertiliser. They do need to be in a reasonably good soil. When the first plants appear, add a bit of potash, it just helps them grow a bit better. Use liquid fertiliser, but only a little. Again, read the instructions. If you're too generous and give them too much fertiliser, you'll get a lot of tomato plant, but not much in the way of tomatoes. They put all their energy into growing leaves. We tended to grow a few in pots last year. It doesn't say they're visible. The advantage of that is that certain small plants will grow quite well in pots. They're transportable, they're easy to maintain, but they do need a lot more water because the water will go through pretty fast. Put a plate underneath, otherwise the roots will continue to grow down through the bottom of the tub and they'll grow into the ground. If you move them, it just rips the roots out. I use plates underneath mine from the local charity shop, a lot cheaper than buying plastic plates from various suppliers. One of the other things you might need to look at is companion planting. This applies for tomatoes as well as for most veggies. If you put certain other veggies in, they grow well. The main one to grow with tomatoes is basil. It just seems to help them grow better. I don't know the reason why, but it's an established fact. So I read. I don't always do what I'm meant to do either. Certain plants will actually sap them, which is interesting. What to grow? There are actually thousands of tomatoes. One of the suppliers has got 132 varieties. There are a few choices. They come in 3 main categories. Indeterminate, which means they keep growing. They'll grow 3 or 4 metres. I've had one that's grown 4 metres, which is about one of those lovely Tommy toe ones, nice and sweet. But you do need stakes for those, obviously. I think the record is something like 17 metres, but that was somebody doing it for fun. Determinate tomatoes are small ones. The difference between determinate ones is they're smaller and they produce all their tomatoes at basically the same time, whereas indeterminate ones keep growing and therefore keep producing over the season. Determinate ones are the ones you tend to use for jams, or sauces and things like that. So you get them, they grow, and that's done. I've also got into dwarf tomatoes, and a bit more later on that. They're basically pot tomatoes, and they grow quite well. And they some of them are very prolific, which is great. I tend to grow most of mine from seeds, although you can now get the Diggers plants at a number of commercial nurseries, which are pretty much the best types of plants you can get because they're heirloom ones and they're grown properly. Now, there are presumably dozens upon dozens of different seed suppliers. These are some that I've used on a regular basis. The Diggers seeds are the heirloom ones, and it's grown by them. It's all done in-house, but they're a bit expensive, $5 a pack. Eden seeds, great range. They're the ones that got the 132 tomato plants for you. Seed collection, quite a bit cheaper, but seem to all work. The dwarf ones you have to get from a particular supplier, and it's a mail order place only, but I bought a dozen or so last year, and they all seem to work well. You can get certain seed companies, more commercial ones, will have them at nurseries, or you can actually buy them by email now. Yates Seeds, been around forever, and Mr. Fotheringill has a few other interesting varieties. You'll tend to get about 20 seeds per pack, and probably, they say 20, you probably get 20 or 30. They're nice little small little things. Some suggestions based on what everybody says and what I've tried as well. The lettering in the brackets is the supplier from the page before that sells those particular seeds. The Amish paste, it's an old traditional one. It's used for sort of slice type stuff, also for making sauce and that sort of stuff. The Burnley Bounty is produced by the Burnley Horticultural Institute in Richmond, Australian obviously, and it's grown for our conditions. It's a nice big red tomato. The Mortgage Lifter is one with a history. The guy who grew the first one grew so many, and they grew so well that he actually was overpaid for his mortgage with it. Tommy Toe, lovely. You'll get hundreds of them. They're small little tomatoes, but they're lovely. The Yellow Pear one was one we grew a couple of years ago. You get hundreds of these as well. The bush might be a couple, perhaps a metre tall at the most, but they are a beautiful, sweet tasting tomato, which I love. Black Cherry one was one we grew last year. Didn't even notice we planted in the community garden, but it grew well, produced hundreds of little black tomatoes, probably about the size, half the size of a golf ball. Again, very sweet, very lovely. We're going to grow those again this year because I kept the seeds. Now, determinate ones are the ones that grow and they're done. Banana egg legs just look lovely. I haven't actually tried growing them yet. Roma, very traditional. Most popular probably tomato of the whole lot. Virtually everybody sells them. They grow a nice big tomato. It's quite tasty. Siberian is one that I'm trying this year. It's one that's meant to grow better in colder environments and will grow for longer. So when the others start to die out, once it gets cooler after April, these will sort of keep going, so I'm told. So I shall find out. But if they're determinate, they may all come in at one particular time anyway. The Patio one, I grew one of these a couple of years ago. Amazingly prolific. It's a quite a nice tomato, sort of halfway between golf ball and tennis ball size. They didn't come in all at once, but they did come in over a short time period. You'll notice the leaves are sort of a thicker, heavier leaf. The ones called potato leaves. Another one I started looking at last year, which seemed to work quite well, is the Dwarf Project. Basically, they're small tomatoes, small plants, that grow tomatoes, so you can grow them in pots, which is always good if you're on a balcony or you've got a small amount of land. And if you grow them in pots like it, you can move them around depending on what else you want to do with it. Some of the names are a bit silly, but they do grow really well, and there's quite a good range of them. How many to grow? Lots. because trust me, you'll never have any problem getting rid of fresh homegrown tomatoes. Somebody will take them, although that might be too many. And in conclusion, just a bit of silliness. Okay, if you have any questions, ask or email. Thanks. Bye.